Hello there, Silverly Bee here, and today I bring you part 7 of our little farm game tutorial. Here you can see what the final result of our farm is going to be looking like. Today we'll look into making the watering mechanic, the fertilizing mechanic, and also making it possible that you can buy new plots for your farm. Then let's get started. So let's start with the watering mechanic. The way the watering mechanic works depends entirely of what you want from your game. The way I'm going to be doing it is, first, all of the plots are going to start dry, and if you want to, you can water them when there's no crops on it. But if you are to plant a crop in a dry plot of land, then it's going to be dry and the crop will not grow. It will only start growing after you water that plot. And at the end, when you harvest it, the plot goes back to being dry. So this is the way the watering is going to be working, and let's implement this. For starters, we should start implementing the dry plot. So over here on our scripts, we can check the plot manager. We're going to be needing a new variable that is going to be telling us whether or not the plot is dry. So here we can have a bool that is going to be saying if the plot is dry, and it's going to start as true. And another thing we're going to be needing is the sprite that is going to be the dry sprite. We can also ask for a normal sprite that is going to be the plot in its normal state. And at the start, we're going to be changing this plot, which is the sprite render that we used before to change just the color. Now we're going to be changing the image as well. So here we gotta say that the sprite is going to be equal to the dry sprite. And right here on the update function, we're going to change this condition to check if it's dry. Because if the plot is dry, then the plant doesn't grow. That's what we're saying here. So we're going to be checking if it's not dry. If it's not dry, then this is going to run, okay? If it is dry, then this isn't going to run and the plant is not going to grow. Now, another thing we need to check is to see on mouse down if on the farm manager a tool is selected, so is selecting is true. If it is, then we're going to run a switch right here. And we're going to be establishing the case 1, that is the water case. So here we have our switch, and the variable is going to be the selected tool on the farm manager. So when it's 1, we know it's the water. The water makes it so that is dry is false. And we are also going to be needing to change the plot image. Okay, so the sprite is going to go back to the normal sprite. This is looking great. Another thing is whenever we harvest, the plot is going to go back to being dry. So we can copy this, and over here on harvest, we're just going to say that is dry is going to be true, and the plot sprite is going to be equal to the dry sprite. Heading back to Unity, we can unlock this from the inspector, and we can go open the plot prefab. And here we can see that the plot manager is not asking us for the sprites. This is because we haven't made the variable public. So over here, we can just change this to public, so we can change it on the inspector. So on Unity, we can see that it's going to be updated now. It's asking us for a dry sprite and a normal sprite. Over on our sprites, we can select the dry sprite here, and we can select the normal farm sprite as well. Heading back to the scene, we can hit play and check to see if it's working. So here we can see that it's all dry, and when we click, we have these plots as wet, When we select the corn and we plant it, we can see that over here it is growing and over here it is not growing. You also notice that there's a difference of coloration between the corn and the plot. This happens because the plot is dry and the corn is not. But here on the extra items, we've seen that there is a corn and a tomato and a sunflower planted dry sprite. And now to fix the watering mechanic, we just need to fix the sprites, okay? So we can pause this. And in order to fix, we're going to be needing a reference to each of these sprites. And this reference is going to be stored on our plant object. So here, we're going to be asking for a public sprite, and it's going to be the dry planted. We're going to have to go to each of our plant objects and assign this sprite, okay? So we save this, and back over on our plot manager, we can just say that whenever we are updating the plant, which we update the sprite, we can say that if the plot is dry, then the plant sprite is going to be, instead of the selected plant stages, it's going to be the dry planted, because the plot is dry. Else, we can have it here. So whenever we update the plant, if the plot is dry, it's going to be that dry planted sprite. And if it's not dry, it's just going to show the stage in which the plant is. Here, this is going to be equal for both of these. So the last adjustment we need to do is whenever we make the is dry false, we also need to update the plant. Okay, so saving this, it should be working properly. We just need to associate the dry planted to the dry plant sprite. Going back to our resources folders, we can go to our plants, and here, for instance, on the sunflower, on the super corn, and on the corn, it is all going to be the same sprite for the dry planted. It's going to be this sprite. Okay, so I've selected all of them. And now for the tomato and the new tomato, it's going to be that other sprite. So here we have replaced it. Then when we hit play, this should be looking fine. Let's see how it's going. Okay, it's all dry. And when we select the corn, it has the same coloration. And when we select the sunflower, it's okay. When we select the tomato, it's also looking good. When we select the super corn, it's just the same. And now selecting the water, let's see if it starts growing. Yes, it's updating correctly. So yes, it's working. One other thing is that you probably got an error over here about a null reference exception. This is because on our update plant, it considers that there's already a plant there, okay? And if we are watering a slot that has no plant there, then it's going to say that it's null. So all we need to do is, here on our farm plant script, we're going to check if there is a plant already planted there. So is planted. If it is planted, we're going to update the plant. If it is not planted, we don't do this. So if we save it, this error should stop appearing. Okay, let's hit play. Now selecting the water, we can see that there's no error anymore. And when we buy the corn, it's okay, it's looking great here, and it's growing fast as always. And when we harvest it, it goes back to being dry. So here, if we plant a corn, it doesn't grow because it's dry. So yeah, this is the watering part. Now, what we need to do is work on the fertilizer. So to start with our fertilizer, I think it's nice to explain the mechanic behind it. Because as you see, many different games use different fertilizing mechanics. What we're going to be doing here is whenever we add a fertilizer, it becomes faster for the plant to grow. And there's a limit to how fast a plant can grow. The limit I'm going to be setting is twice as fast as the normal growth, but you can choose the limit you want or the limit that makes most sense for your game. And another thing is that whenever we harvest the plant, the fertilizing effects, they go away. So this is how the mechanic's going to be treated as right here. So the first thing I'm going to do is on our scripts, I'm going to be opening the plot manager and I'm going to be adding a new variable that is going to be a float called speed. This is going to be the speed at which our plants grow. For starters, it's going to be 1, so it grows at normal speed. But whenever you add a fertilizer, so here we're going to be making a case 2, where it's going to be the fertilizer, we're first going to check if the speed isn't at its limit. So if it's below the speed limit, I'm going to be adding 0.2 to the speed. Now, in order for our fertilizer to work, right here where we have our timer, that is what is called in order to change the stage of the plant. Here, we just have to multiply time.delta time by the speed. Okay, so whenever the speed is 1, it's just going to be normal. And when the speed starts growing, it's going to make it faster. Another thing we need to do is just to, whenever we harvest it, change the speed to 1 again. One thing to consider here is that the way it's working right now, because we're changing the speed when we harvest and not when we plant, for instance, if we have an empty plot and we just start putting fertilizer into it when we plant in it, it's going to be way faster because the speed is only reset whenever we harvest it. So an empty plot is going to be able to be fertilized for now. We can save it, and when we go to Unity, we can check to see if the fertilizing is working. Since there's no visual cue of the fertilizer, what we can do is we can look here on our plot manager. We can select this plot, for instance, that is the furthermost left, and we can change it here on the inspector from the normal to the debug mode. And you can see here on the plot manager that you're able to see the speed. So when we hit play, if we use the fertilizer here, we should see that the speed is going to get higher, okay, until 2. So hitting play, let's check to see it. I'm gonna buy the tomato, water it, and use the fertilizer. Here you can see that speed is 1.2, 1.4, and here it's supposed to be twice as fast. So here we have it, the tomato after just 15 seconds instead of the usual 30 seconds, I guess. We can pick it up and the speed goes back to 1. It's working as expected. We can buy as many items as we can and use the fertilizer just to check to see. So here when we water these crops, we can see that they grow pretty fast. So hitting pause, I can tell that I forgot one single aspect of the fertilizer, which is that the fertilizer requires you to have money. So going back to our script, right here, whenever we use the fertilizer, we must make a transaction. So just like we did it right here, we're going to be asking for a transaction over here. So we can access the farm manager and make a transaction. This is going to be a hard-coded -10. Another thing we need to do is to check that we have this money. So I'm just going to make an if statement over here that is going to check if fm.money is greater or equal to 10. So if we have enough money, we can then finally buy our fertilizer. I can save this, heading to Unity. So here we can go back to the normal inspector and then hit play to see if this is working. I'm buying the corn, I'm using the fertilizer, and it's lowering my money. And yeah, it looks like it's working. So now what we gotta do is to implement the buy the plot mechanic. So if we go over here to the farm, right now we have a 3x3 farm. I believe this is very tiny. So to make it better, I'm going to expand this farm out here. Okay. And in order to make it better for us to see it, I'm going to be changing the size right here from 5 to about 7. And I'll also bring the farm over here. So now what we gotta do is we gotta make a variable that is going to tell us which of these plots are bought and which of these plots we have still to buy. So here we have the plot manager. I'm going to be making a public bool that is going to tell us if it's bought or not, okay? And we're going to start it with true, but we're going to be changing it according to whether or not this plot is going to be already bought or not in our game, okay? So here at the start, we have the dry sprite and the normal sprite. What we need to have as well is a sprite for when it's not been bought. So it's a unavailable. This unavailability is from the fact that the plot hasn't been bought yet, and not just like we have here on our unavailable color that the plot can't be planted on or something like that. So what we need to do here is if is bought, then the plot dot sprite at the start is going to be the unavailable sprite. Else it's going to be the dry sprite. We can save it just to check to see how it looks like in game. We just go back to Unity. And I know that I want these plots to be available. So these ones and every other plot, I know that I don't want them to be available. So here through here, I'm just going to be organizing it here. Okay. So these are the ones that I want available. And from here to here, I'm going to be saying that it hasn't been bought. And the unavailable sprite on the prefab here, we can change the unavailable sprite to this sprite right here. We can hit play to check. Oh, it's just the opposite. So now that we know that it was the opposite, it's probably because, well, if it's bought, it's supposed to be the dry sprite, and if it hasn't been bought, so if it's not bought, then it's going to be the unavailable sprite. So when we go to Unity, this should be working properly. Hitting play, we can see that all of these aren't bought and all of these are. But if we were to plant, we can see we can still plant here. It looks odd, but we can. Okay, so in order to fix this fact that we can plant right here, we're going to go back to our script and say that if it is planting and the selected plant has a price that we can afford, we have also got to check to see if it's bought, if the plot of land that we're planting on is owned by us. Another thing is we need to do the same thing on mouse over in order to make it available or unavailable. So right here, it's going to be unavailable if it isn't bought. So heading to Unity, you see that right now you shouldn't be able to plant here. And the red color indicates that we can't. Okay, this is looking good. Now, all we need to do is to make it possible for us to actually buy the plot of land that we want whenever we have the money. So going to our plot, here we have the case 2 of the fertilizing. Now we gotta add case 3 to buy the plot, okay? Just like with the fertilizing, we have to check to see if we have the money. So if fm.money is greater or equal to 100, and also if it is, we're going to make a transaction of minus 100. Now what we have to do is also check to see if the plot that we are buying is a plot that we can buy. So here, besides the money that we need, we also need to check to see if it's bought. You can only buy a plot of land if it's not already free for you to use, okay? So here we have our transaction, and we also need to declare that it is bought, and we also need to change the plot sprite. Later on, we're going to be making restrictions on when we can use water or when we can use the fertilizer on the plot. So it's guaranteed whenever we buy a new plot that it's going to be dry when we buy it. So here we can just say that plot.sprite is going to be equal to the dry sprite. Okay, looking great. Let's save this and let's try to buy new plots of our farm. When we hit play, you can see that these are open. We can buy corn over here and then water it. Now that we have enough money, we can now buy a new plot of land. We lost 100, but we gained a new plot that we can plan on. So here we have it, all of the plots unlocked, and the buy plot function is working correctly. Now, what we need to do is work with exceptions and possible errors and visual cues for our users to know if they can buy the plot of land or the fertilizer and which plot they have selected. And to do so, let's go to the plot manager script. And over here, we're going to be dealing with all of these scenarios. For instance, if you're fertilizing a plot of land, it has to have been bought before. You can't fertilize a plot of land that doesn't belong to you. So here we're just going to check if it's bought. And here on the water, we're just going to be using an if statement to check if it's bought. If it is, then you can water this plot of land. If it isn't, then you can't water it. Another thing is, when we are harvesting, we can't harvest while we're holding a tool, because a tool is supposed to do something else with its click. So here, we're going to check if Farm Manager is not selecting. So here we have it, not selecting, because we can only harvest if it's not selecting. Another thing is to manage the colors. We can go over here, and if fm dot is selecting, we can again make another switch case with the fm dot selected tool. If it's case 1, this is you're selecting watering. It's going to be unavailable for a plot that doesn't belong to you, but for every other type of plot, it's going to be available. Even if it's already watered, it doesn't matter because water costs nothing and there isn't overwatering as a mechanic here on this game. We're just going to check if it's bought. If it is, it's going to be available. If it isn't, it's going to be unavailable. And when it comes to the fertilizing, it's going to be the same thing. If it's a bought plot of land, you can fertilize it. if it's not bought, you can't fertilize it. And you're going to be able to fertilize a plot of land that hasn't been planted yet. And you can fertilize many times, so I'm just going to say that case 2 is also going to be here. So here we go, case 1 and case 2 here. Now case 3, it's going to be the exact opposite. You're only going to be able to buy if it hasn't been bought yet. So here we just have to say that it's not bought. And on our default case, we're just going to say it's unavailable. We can save it, head back to Unity to check to see if it's working. Let's hit play. Here, when you select the watering tool, you can water all of these, but you can't these ones. Here, you can't buy any of these, but you can buy these ones. So here we have it, and this mechanic is working. I just forgot one small detail. Going back to our plot manager, we can see that there's no mention of money or anything like that. But this can only be available if and only if we have enough money to buy. So if money is greater or equal to 100. Now here, since it deals with the case 1 and case 2, the money is a bit more complicated, because for the water, money doesn't matter, but for the fertilizer, it does. How can we fix this? It's very simple. First, we're going to ask that the money be greater or equal to, and since we know that the fm.selected2 can be 1 or 2, and we know that when it's 1, we don't need any money, the water costs 0, and when it's 2, it costs 10. We can just do it like this, fm.selected2 minus 1. So if it's case 1, it's going to be 0 here, and if it's case 2, it's going to be 1 here. We can just multiply it by 10. This function is not complicated at all. It's just saying that if it's case 1, it has to be greater or equal to 0. If it's case 2, it has to be greater or equal to 10. Okay, saving this, we can head back to Unity. When we hit play, we can see what we're talking about. Here, I've watered these parts, I planted it, and I'm gonna spend all of my fertilizer here until it's no longer available for me to buy it. So here we have it, our little farm that has grown a little bit and now has different functions, but it's still our little farm. So that was it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and if you find this video useful, please consider leaving a like. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below, and if you want to see more content such as this one, please consider subscribing. This is the last part of our farm game tutorial, but if you haven't, you can go check out the first part of this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!